Today I'm going to be talking about a very underappreciated sci-fi classic. A movie that posits the question, what if London was full of water? What if? What would you do then? Huh? What would you do about that if London was full of water, punk? Well, you need not wonder anymore, as this movie answers that question, among several others. So without further ado, let me tell you why I love Split Second. So I'm going to start this one off a bit differently by asking the question, what makes an acting performance good? Now, we probably all have something that comes to mind when we think about what is a good performance. It's probably something really passionate, or really emotional, or even something that's really subtle and understated. What probably isn't coming to your mind is something like Split Second, or Keanu Reeves in Johnny Mnemonic, for example. To me, there are two different ways to be a good actor. The first is simply to be utterly believable as the character you're playing. A performance where it's difficult to separate the actor from the character they're playing, where you look at it and you go, I believe he is that person. But the second way is when an actor really matches the energy of the movie they're in. They really match the identity of the movie they're in, and give it what it needs to succeed. And Rutger Hauer, the star of Split Second, God rest his soul, we love him, he is a true embodiment of the second. He might not always give the most realistic performances, though I think he was perfectly great at that. But what he's really good at is matching the energy of whatever he's in. That's exactly why he works so well in something stupid and ridiculous like Hobo with a Shotgun, for example. But I kind of want to get into that a little deeper. So I want to briefly go back to Johnny Mnemonic, one of the classic movies. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it immediately. It is insane. Johnny Mnemonic is a real classic B-movie piece of schlock. It's often regarded, though, as something that's pretty cheesy, one of those kind of so bad it's good, in quotations. Now, that's not really a concept I believe in per se, but I think part of the reason it gets this reputation, whereas other similar movies aren't really afforded the same grace, is because of the acting performances. And yet people still constantly look towards this movie and see the performance by Keanu Reeves and go, that's a bad performance. It's wooden, it's robotic, it's terrible. The issue with that is that Keanu Reeves gives the movie what it needs. If anything, Johnny Mnemonic is an example of why Keanu Reeves is a great actor. He wholeheartedly knows what the energy the movie is going for, what it needs, and his animated and robotic and maddening delivery is really what makes it work. And a lot of the side characters are giving the same kind of performances too. Look at Udo Kier, and even surprisingly Henry Rollins gives a fantastic performance in Johnny Mnemonic. His little impassioned speech about capitalism is exactly the kind of energy that a movie like that needs. It's why it's so entertaining, because he matches the schlocky energy that the movie is going for. Not every movie needs a serious performance in it in order for it to be good. In fact, you can see an example of that in the very same movie from Ice-T. Now, what I will say is that Ice-T is actually really funny in this movie because of the way he points. He points at stuff in such a hilarious way. It's funny every time, I don't know why. It always makes me think of that scene at the end of Wayne's World 1, where Chris Farley is pointing at where the limo is. But his actual line delivery, his actual energy, doesn't really match what the movie needs at all. He's trying to play it too serious, he's trying to play it too realistically, and that's why it doesn't work. If we look at a more recent example, something like Morbius, a movie hated by all.
Not by Al. No!
That movie ultimately doesn't work because Jared Leto tries to play it like such a serious, deep philosophical movie, instead of the silly little goofy vampire film that it is. And that's ultimately why Matt Smith is so much more compelling in the movie. If we'd had two Matt Smiths, there wouldn't have been a problem. And ultimately the reasons why Johnny Mnemonic works is exactly the same reason why Split Second works. I know I went on a bit of a tangent there, but I felt like it was worth giving context to the discussion I'm trying to create. Rutger Hauer is excellent at delivering lines. He's excellent at giving the right facial expressions when you need a performance to match the schlocky energy of the movie he's in. There's a scene super early on in this movie where he calls a dog a dickhead and shows it his badge. And it's great. Everything about it is so charismatic that you want to follow his journey, you want to see what he's up to. And the side characters in this are also equally brilliant. You have Kim Cattrall playing this kind of airy love interest slash damsel. There's one really hilarious scene where she gets scared by a pigeon and then kind of brushes it off. But the real standout star to this movie is a character called Dick Durkin. Dick Durkin is played by Alistair Duncan, who hasn't really been in a lot of movies. He's in a lot more TV and he does a lot more voice acting work for video games. And he's excellent. He really is one of the best reasons that this movie rules. He's so entertaining. He starts off as this kind of pencil-neck nerd who wants to do all of his research and follow all the rules. He doesn't want to upend things as he works with the kind of reckless and crazy Rutger Hauer character, whose name is hilariously Harley Stone. And then after a brief encounter with the monster, goes totally insane. And that's right, I haven't even really talked about the plot of this movie so far, but we'll get to that. That will be the next slide, I promise. But his facial expressions, his animated nature, and his whimsical delivery really sells the character for what he is. He's a perfect foil to Rutger Hauer's lead. And I think you'll agree, one of the most standout performances of the movie. Very entertaining. Absolutely what the movie needed, and why this movie doesn't just get relegated to cheesy, nonsensical B-movie schlock that's not worth your time. Instead, it becomes transcendent and brilliant and entertaining, something so watchable you can't take your eyes off. And that's ultimately why the acting is so important in these movies, and why it's so important sometimes to have an actor or have actors who can match the energy of what they're in, rather than people who are giving these, impassioned, realistic, emotional responses. We underestimate the kind of power these actors have, and the power that these kind of performances can bring. And it's certainly true that we didn't do anywhere near enough to appreciate Rutger Hauer while he was still with us. I miss him always. But that's kind of enough about acting. It was kind of a long tangent, so we'll move on to the next section of this video. And ultimately the next reason why I love Split Second. So next I'm going to talk about the plot and the production design. I'm going to kind of talk about it as a one-er. Because these elements don't really stand out enough on their own to deserve their own slide, they're not really the main appeal of the movie, outside of one element of it, but that's for the final section. We'll get there, don't worry. The plot itself is pretty simple. Rutger Hauer lives in flooded London. The future of London, of course, is now its floods. And there's big rats everywhere, there's no chocolate or coffee, or there's not a lot. Rutger Hauer's addicted to them both. And he is a rogue police officer who is on the hunt for a serial killer who killed his partner several years earlier. Thanks to an unfortunate incident where the serial killer managed to get a swipe away at him, Rutger Hauer has some kind of psychic link to this bad guy. This bad guy who, and I guess from here on out in the video there's going to be spoilers, so if you don't want to see any spoilers, maybe you could just stop watching here. But please don't, I need that watch time. Bro, come on, please. Please, don't stop. In any case, they kind of make a lot of allusions that this killer is more than just a man. In fact, Rutger Hauer deposits that he might be some kind of incarnation of evil. And there's a lot of parts of the movie where they kind of deposit that he might be this kind of like rat guy. Like a part rat, part guy. Like a rat man. A rat dude, if you will. A rat person. Maybe like a friend to all rats. Or possibly even a mouse on a good day. Essentially, someone with some rat-like tendencies. And he eats people's hearts, and he's been leaving cryptic, satanic messages around that Dick Durkin, in his intensive knowledge of astrology, is going to figure out what it all means. Finally, they encounter him, Dick Durkin gets injured, and he goes fucking insane, bro. It's awesome. It's a pretty simple and a pretty basic plot, but it is one that works to get you from A to B. Ultimately, the movie is spearheaded by the characters and their unique, imaginative ideas. And that's kind of where we move on to the production, because there's a lot of actual imagination in this. Most of the sets are pretty gloomy, but they do their bits to try and jazz up the vehicles. The characters are imaginative, the bad guy is really imaginative too. I think the little details about how there's not a lot of chocolate and not a lot of coffee, so he's addicted to them both, is interesting. For some reason, his apartment is full of pigeons. I never really understood why they decided to do that, but it's hilarious. They also have these, cool ass guns. He's got this giant pistol that I guess shoots exploding rounds, and there's this minigun shotgun that they get later on that's really cool. And I gotta be honest, the underwater subway that they go to at the end of the movie is really cool. It kind of makes you feel like you're in a Metro video game if anyone has ever played those. It makes this really cool setting for the final sequence. This movie is also not as dark and gloomy as it certainly could be. A lot of movies like this end up being maybe a bit too dark and a bit too grim, but this one's actually got quite a lot of nice lighting in it. I also appreciate the English setting because it lets you have these kind of really comical background performances. Peter Postlethwaite makes an appearance in this and he's pretty fun. And there's a chief of police who's hilarious. He has this tirade in the middle of the movie that's really funny. So while this is obviously a cheap movie that was quickly produced, there's still clearly a lot of care and a lot of imagination that ties the whole thing together. It's very obvious to me that they saved their practical effects budget for the final sequence, and it is worth it, we'll get to that. But the build-up, the characters, their quirks, and ultimately the performances that bring life to these whimsical characters is what makes it all work together so well. The little elements of the setting do enough to make it interesting. Flooded London mostly is just apartment buildings with water, I'll be honest. But they still managed to give it this vibe and this sense of a real living, breathing world that they're in. It's really cool, and it's really interesting to look at. If you like these kind of movies, I think a good example would be, Johnny Mnemonic is obviously a good example of a similar movie that you might like, even though that's a bit more wacky. But Trances is probably an even better similar movie. If you've liked Trances, of which I believe there's like 100 of them, then this is a good movie that you might like as well. But with that in mind, I'm going to move on to one of the best parts of this film overall. So finally, we're going to talk about the monster. Now, obviously, if you haven't seen this movie, I'm going to describe him, I'm going to spoil it. I'm going to try not to show him, and then you'll have, if you watch it and you haven't seen it before, you won't get that spoiled, you'll get to see him revealed. It's very cool. But if you have seen it, you might know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, has anyone ever played the game Judge Dredd, Dredd vs. Death for the Xbox and PlayStation 2? Or maybe you've read the Judge Dredd comics and know a little bit about the Dark Judges. Because of this monster, this rat guy, this Splinter motherfucker, looks just like Judge Dredd. Some people say he looks like the Xenomorph, and I kind of get that. It's kind of like if someone painted Judge Death totally black. But it's actually a really cool costume. The moments where he attacks them early on, we don't really see him, but we get to see these big claws, we get to see all this devastation, there's these fun little practical effects, he's really ominous and powerful. And then when he's finally revealed at the end and we get to see this fabulous creature, maybe not as high production value as Alien, the Xenomorph from the Alien franchise, but it still looks really good. It's a really good costume. There's great practical effects in there, especially kind of when they get close to beating him at the end. He's slicing up stuff, they're destroying this subway train. He's awesome. He's a really, really cool monster. I remember reading something about someone told me actually, that they didn't really have a lot of time to work on this monster. And with that in mind, I think they've done a fantastic job of managing to create something that looks really good. Even before knowing that, I was impressed by the costume. I thought it looked really cool for something so low budget, but knowing that it was also something that they didn't have a lot of time to perfect, I think they've really pulled it out the park and created something really, really good in that timescale. And so that's kind of the face of it all. We've got great characters, propelled by fantastic acting performances for a simple plot that lets them breathe, and a great monster at the end. And some cool locations and weapons along the way too. What's not to love? So if you haven't seen it, I hope you check it out, and if you have, do you feel the same way? Maybe if you didn't like it, maybe you could go back and give it a second look. I will tell you straight up that when I watched this the first time, I liked it a bunch, but I didn't love it, and the second time it really kind of clicked for me. I think knowing where it goes and kind of going into it with the energy the movie wants does this movie a lot of favours. Once you kind of know what it's going for, it makes a lot more sense. It's a movie I really love. I always laugh when I hear him call that dog a dickhead. I always laugh at the police chief, and I always delighted whenever I see Dick Durkin go crazy. It's brilliant. It's definitely a movie you can rewatch again, and it's certainly one of the movies that is totally underappreciated. Just like Rutger Hauer himself, this movie is being slept on. Not enough people have seen it. And so there's my review. If you liked it, feel free to like, subscribe. You don't have to, I'm not going to force you to do anything, but I hope you do. And also, check out some of my other videos. I've talked about a bunch of obscure, unknown movies on this channel so far. And if you check them out, that would be really cool. And then, leave a comment, let me know if you like those movies. Let me know if you liked this review, if you agreed or disagreed or whatever, how you felt about Split Second, or whether you want to watch it now. It's all good, it's all easy, it's your life. Do whatever you want. I'm happy. Catch you in the next one.